just want to welcome everyone to tonight's presentation. We have my good friend Carey here to do his thing, and yeah, just take it away, JC.
All right. I'm gonna share. Do I have the ability to share? I do. Excellent.
You should.
I do. You guys are rock stars and had me ready to go. All right. So you see that now?
Yep.
I see a big logo.
That's it. All right. So I paid the bills for this now. All right. So that's good. I'm going to shrink down the camera so I can't see you guys. So with that, if I say something during this class that I think is funny, I'm going to assume that you think so. If you have a question or whatever, put it in the chat, and I'll stay as long as I need to answer it. And I'm going to go. I'm going to get going on this now. All right. So this class is really aimed at people who feel like this when they decide to start talking about adding strobes or speed lights or even constant lights. If you feel more like this guy, then I hope that I can still teach you something or help you see lighting in a different kind of way. But, this class is really aimed at those people that, are looking to go from fear to flash. If you talk to enough people, I'll get into my history in a second, but I've been talking to people that were advanced amateurs or pros for the better part of 15 years now. And so many of them are scared of lights. It's crazy to me because I don't find it to be that difficult, but that's why I'm here. And that's why somebody who is moderately talented can teach a class. So my name is Joseph Carey. Mostly everybody calls me JC, which is convenient because it's the initials. jcarey at fjwestcott.com is my email. If you copy that down and you write me, I'll answer you. I will not only answer you, I will try to give you an answer that makes sense and is cohesive. My Instagram is jcphotomedia. You can find me there. Please, I'll follow you back, I promise. You can find the full line of Westcott products at FJ Westcott. We have a lot of free lighting education, which I'm going to say is mostly really pretty good over at Westcott U. And our Facebook group, it's a no snark zone. If you've got questions that you don't want to ask in some of the other groups where people give you the whole JRTFM answer, our group is the right group for you, whether you're using our products or not. If you're using somebody else's products, don't talk about them, but that's the first rule of Westcott group. But if you don't want to be embarrassed and you've got questions, you want to be around a bunch of people that are pretty decent, it's a really good Facebook group. So there's that. Some of you might recognize me from my career as a male model. I was featured in the Super Bowl a few years ago in an ad, even made it to the USA Today version of that ad. It's a picture that my daughter pressed the shutter on and is the most I ever got paid for any picture I took in my life. I tried to double dip and tell them, oh yeah, I knew the model, but it didn't work out. So joking aside from that, I'm going to do this part right now. I'm going to go through this pretty fast. I know you guys didn't come here necessarily to hear all about Westcott stuff, but maybe you did. And if you did, I'll cover more of this anytime you want. But this is the stuff that I use. And I'm proud to say that I've been using Westcott stuff long before I worked there. I left my position. I was the MPS rep for the Northeast, not Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. I was not your guys' rep, but I did meet Justin through helping Justin. I did do the right thing on a few occasions, even though it wasn't my region. I left Nikon. I wasn't part of one of those layoffs that you guys have heard about. I left and went to Westcott because I believed in the product. And I wouldn't have went if I didn't. So I know not everybody gets to say that, but it's something that I'm really happy about. So I used the FJ wireless flash system. I started with the 400 while I was still at Nikon when it first came out. I called my friend over at Westcott, one of them. I said, hey, can you send me that? I'd like to play with it. And they did. And I was very happy. It was consistent. It did what I wanted it to do. I didn't have to read the book to figure out how to use it. I was like, all right, this is pretty cool. So when the time came and they were like, hey, we'd like you to work here, I said, well, is there going to be more stuff? They said, yes. I said, is it going to be just as good? They said, yes. I said, sign me up. So at the heart of that system is the FJX2M. And what's cool about that versus some of the other brands out there is it is a universal camera brand trigger. So if most of you that have been pros for a long time have probably noticed that there are more people than ever shooting multiple brands. There's a lot of people that shoot Nikon and Fuji, or Sony and Fuji, or maybe they shoot Canon for their stills, but they use Lumix for video, but maybe they want to shoot a still every now and then. Our remote goes into the shoe, gives you all functionality, whichever brand you want to use. The only one that needs any kind of an adapter is Sony. Sony uses a very, I'll go with advanced is the nice way, but they use a different shoe than everybody else, and that means it needs an adapter. That adapter is $19. And, I'm shooting Sony right now and having no problems. So the adapter hasn't been a challenge. The smallest light in our setup is the FJ80. It's our speed light. It's a round head. It's 80 watts, hence the name. It is also multi-brand compatible. So if you have that in your bag and you are shooting with multiple brands, or you're shooting with a friend of yours and you want to hand them that, you push a button on it, you change to the brand that you're using, and it works. It's very cool. It is a transceiver. It can also control the next two lights you're going to see and any lights that we come out with in the future. It's also touchscreen, which is very cool. I was nervous about it when they first told me about it because touchscreens, especially first generation touchscreens, can be finicky. Ours is benefited from the fact that everybody does a touchscreen now. So very cool. You can use it as a transceiver. It's easy to control the other lights. It's easy to change your power, to change your camera. Very nice. The 200 watt is what I'm carrying a lot these days because it's the terrier of our lineup. It's small. It's about the same size as the FJ80 if it was stretched out, but it's as powerful as, about 3 of them. So that's great. It's an industry-leading recycle time, 1.3 seconds at full power. That's a half a second faster than our nearest competition. 450 full power lights. It's also AC/DC. You can get an adapter that goes into the battery thing. So if you wanted to use this in the studio for step and repeat, or something like, an event, but you wanted to plug it in, it'll go all day. So that's a cool feature. Then there's the biggest one in the lineup right now. That's the FJ400. It's also the oldest. It gives you 480 full power flashes. It's AC/DC with no adapter. All you gotta do is take your recharging cable, plug it in, and as long as you started at over 25%, you'll never run out. Yes?
Hi, Justin. How you doing?
Oh. All right. 0.9 second full power recycle time.
Well,
Consistent.
I figured you've been busy. I'm sure it keeps.
I can hear you guys in the background. Okay, just letting you know. Consistent white balance. A 20-watt modeling lamp. That consistent white balance, you guys are pros. You guys get this. When I teach this class to a really beginner class, they kind of take this for granted. The 400, the 200, the 80 are all 5,500 Kelvin. From shot to shot, they stay like that. That is not the case with some of the other stuff that's in our same price point. It has that universal wireless support. And here's the other thing that I think matters. Our customer service and our repair is based in Toledo, Ohio. Everything as we know in this world, unfortunately, is built in Asia. That's from Profoto down to the cheapest lights out there. So if you're going to pay an inexpensive price for your lights, you might as well get something that's going to be supported, it's going to be consistent, it's going to be fast.
Hey, JC, have a question on that last light.
Okay.
Is it high-speed sync
Yep.
compatible?
Yep.
Thank you.
Everything we make is high-speed sync, slow sync. We also have something called freeze mode, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Up to the fastest speed it can do. I tested it with A1s this week. I'm getting the 400th of a second in normal sync, and then after that going to high-speed sync. I'm going to 8,000th. On the A1, I'm actually even going a little faster because the A1 can shoot a little faster, but it does get a little wonky at that point. I think that's the camera issue. But yes, high-speed sync. You'll see a ton of examples of high-speed sync in a minute, more than you probably care to. Good question, though. Rapid boxes. So anybody who's been around for a while has used soft boxes. They've probably used a soft box that was rod-based and realized how hard that is. We came out with the Rapid Box a while ago. a lot of people have now taken that design. A few years ago, we changed them over to the switch. What makes the switch is that not only can you use it with a Bowens mount, which is what our lights use, but you can put any ring on the back of it. They all cost around $20, $25. So if you're somebody who already has some Dynalights or some Paul C. Buffs or some Pro Photos, I don't think anybody just has Pro Photos laying around, but if you're already invested in another brand and you're trying to slowly move towards a wireless solution, but you still are doing some stuff in the studio, you can do that, and you can use the same set of soft boxes for everything. The Apollo orb that's shown here, you're going to see it a bunch in the class, in some of the behind-the-scenes pictures, was my gateway drug into Westcott. I started using one of those about 15, 16 years ago. I still use it. You know, these are all based on an umbrella, easy to set up, still give you a great quality of light. They're very inexpensive for what they do. I really dig them. All right. Umbrellas. We've been making umbrellas since 1899. We still make umbrellas. Pretty much whatever size or shape you want. All right. So that's that. I've done the commercial part. I'll answer any questions you guys have about that stuff. But let's talk photography and let's talk lighting. So me, I shoot. I love to shoot. I'm not a rep for one of the companies that, like, I'm a sales guy and I shoot. I'd rather be shooting. I love abandoned buildings, like this one. It's like one of my favorite abandoned buildings I've ever been to. I've shot a little bit of sports over the last 7 years. Got lucky to have access to some stuff that I never thought I'd shoot. And I don't take any of that for granted. I've got to shoot, best athletes in the world doing what they do. Cool. But the thing that always comes back for me, that I always come back to, is lighting. Because at the end of the day, I'm a little bit of a control freak. I'll throw that out there right now. I've heard people for years tell me, oh, I'm an available light shooter. And they kind of say it like it's a badge of honor. They're an available light shooter. I'm like, that's awesome, but flashes are available to me. I'm going to make the best picture that I can make wherever I'm going to do it. So that's why I like lighting. So my journey from being somebody who took pictures to somebody that made pictures starts here. I was at the Trade Center. I tore up my knee, tore the ACL and the MCL, gained about 100 pounds, figured out I wouldn't be catching for the Mets, and was like, hey, what can I do? I got to move forward. So I met this witch who not only gave me that kid, but also signed me up for a class at SVA. Knew that I was interested, but also knew that I didn't use lights, didn't really shoot people, but knew that I wanted to. And the class was terrible. It was terrible. But I shot 2 models every week for 8 weeks and got over the being scared to shoot people and started to get a little bit of an understanding of lights. So thank you. I owe her big for both of those things that she gave me. So why should we have lights? If we're doing this in person, I wait, I give you guys a chance to answer. We're going to skip that. The answer is because this picture doesn't look like that. Because the camera tells me that this is correctly exposed. So if I put this in aperture priority, I aim it at him, it tells me that that's right. It's obviously not right. We're obviously, photographers, and we know that we like the way that I like the way the sky looks better here. Maybe I'm a little under, but I like dynamic. I like drama. Anybody who knows me will swear to that. But I want now both of those two things to work together. And I can do that by adding light. In this case, I'm going to add 2. For those of you that are going to look at this and go, oh, yeah, it's easy when you got an assistant. I think there's like 3 pictures in this whole thing where I have an assistant. They're all from that day. That's Andy from Nikon. And, by realizing that I can add light to get the picture that I want and control the light better, I can go from that picture to this picture really quick with no post, no messing around. Everybody who sees the picture knows what I want you to look at, but you still get, something dynamic in the background. This is probably more dynamic than like most of us would like, but it's a style that I enjoy. But it's not the only way I shoot. But by having this system and this method that I use, I'm able to get to that really quick so that I can spend more time being creative when it comes time to add the lights. Again, camera says that this is okay, and that's terrible. The sky looked like that. Maybe the sky didn't really look like that, but it looked close to that. I could see it in my head. So let's add a light. Let's get that picture instead. You know, there's no reason not to add lights. No reason to be scared of them. You can really go a long way without having to carry a bunch of stuff. So again, why should we have lights? There's one reason: creativity. If the ambient light bores you, add light. I mean, it's that simple. That's my, my mantra at this point. So let's jump in. Let's figure out like how to get there. So these are some concepts for learning lighting that I find really valuable. And again, like I told you guys at the beginning, I gave you the heads up at the beginning. If you're an experienced lighting guy, I think some of this will still feel good to you and you'll go, oh yeah, or I never thought of it that way, or like, hey, I think this guy's really wrong. For the people that are not using lights, whoa, what happened? Sharing is paused. Somebody did something on the other side, maybe?
Yeah.
What just happened?
I think so. Arch.
Do you have me back now?
Yeah.
That was really weird. Never saw that happen before. I've only had that happen. Like, did somebody have to let somebody in or something?
No.
All right. Sorry. Apologies, guys. I'm out of my flow. I got to start over. No. Here's some important concepts for me. All right. For those of you who shot film, 10,000 pictures took a long time. Right now we're in the best time ever to learn lighting, to learn photography, as far as I'm concerned. It's also the worst time, because there are people that never really learn photography because it's too easy. But, for me, every time I start to try to pick up a new type of photography, I come back to this rule, because otherwise I would just quit. I'm a tolerable sports photographer now because I made a lot of bad pictures to get there. I'm a decent lighting guy because, I made a lot of bad pictures to get there. But I live by this. First 10,000 were bad. And then I really embraced this. Revel in failure. I live by this maxim, Wayne Gretzkyism. I know that I wish that, I wish one of your guys, Lemieux or somebody had said something cool like this, but you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. I carry my lights and my camera all the time. The light might not be on my hip, but the camera is. I definitely go by that. If I don't have my camera, I'm just standing around staring at stuff. So, and then pre-visualization. This is the other basic concept. And I've had some people lately give me a little bit of a hard time about this, saying, oh, you don't need to learn to pre-visualize anymore because the camera does it for you. What you see is what you get when you're looking through a mirrorless camera. Well, it can't predict the strobe, and I still think that ability to carry a repertoire of ideas in your head of where you want to be is one of the most important things we can do as a photographer, whether we're using lights or not. That ability to look at a scene and go, hey, at 2.8, this is going to be 100th, or at 2.8, this is going to be 2,000th, is really important. And reveling in failure and taking a ton of pictures is how I got there. Being able to see all the EXIF data and go back to it and go, what did I do well? What did I do wrong? Is something that I did a lot of. Now it's pretty much just ingrained in my head, but it's something that I think that anybody who's new to photography, whether they're a landscape shooter or a portrait shooter, you have to take time to look at what worked and look at what didn't work. Instead of just getting frustrated and fixing it, but only sort of fixing it, figure out how to get to that point faster the next time. And then keep it simple. You guys have all been on assignments where they tell you you're going to be in a certain place, and then they tell you, oh, that's not the spot anymore. And that ability just to take a step back, say, hey, I'm gonna take this down to bare bones and still make a good picture. It might not be what I thought about, is a really important thing. This is from a couple of years ago at the Mets. First, I had a 20-foot wide by 15-foot deep space. And then at 5:30 in the morning, they were like, you've got 6 feet wide by 4 feet. So I ended up shooting this whole thing at 35 millimeters, put the softbox basically in front of his face and shot under it. It was tough, but I rescued it. I kept it simple, made decent pictures, not what I envisioned, but I didn't get frustrated. And if you get into lighting, if there's one thing that is 100% certain, you'll get frustrated. I think you guys probably are already doing this. If you're somebody who shoots aperture priority or shutter priority for your sports stuff or something else that you shoot, that's awesome. But when you're shooting flash, I recommend that you put the camera in manual. Why? Because aperture priority, shutter priority are going to give you control of 2/3 of the exposure triangle. I want control over all of it at any time, being able to switch those things really quickly. This is a 2-stop change and really totally changes the look of the picture. Getting the light out of the shoe is something that I find really valuable. Obviously I've seen people with flashes that bounce and get really great results, but we live in a time now where radio transceivers and systems are really inexpensive and pretty much ubiquitous. You might as well just get the light source out of the shoe. Why waste it in the shoe where it's just going to give you flat light that's not going to look that good? And why is that? Because there's a lot more qualities of light than just the amount of light. Like I mentioned before, that we're in this golden age of photography. We are, where we can get more light easily. We just turn up the ISO. Every camera that's even half decent now can shoot 800 or 1600. Never mind some that are shooting really crazy ISOs. So amount of light isn't the key component. It's just one of the characteristics of light. Direction, hardness, color, those are all things that go a long way towards telling a story that you want told that you're probably not going to be there to tell.
That's Nick Ott.
Directionality is that first quality. And where we put the lights, it's at the very end for me, but I feel like I got to put it here so that people start thinking about it when we're talking through some examples. A front light is going to be very flat. It's going to get rid of all the shadows. It's going to get rid of most of the wrinkles, but there's no depth to it. It doesn't make it bad. Just use it when you need that kind of light. Anytime you can get to the light to the left, to the right, up, down, you're going to get a lot more. You're going to get more shadows. You're going to get more depth. You're going to create more contrast. You're going to make more interesting pictures in general. Backlight is something that I very rarely am ever going to use by itself, but it's still a valuable tool to use, to create separation from the background, to create depth, to create drama. Uplight, it's called monster light in the video world. It's unnatural. We're not used to seeing light come that way, and that's why it makes people somewhat uncomfortable and can take somebody who's very cuddly, like my friend Gavin, and make them seem a little bit more intimidating. Soft light versus hard light. This is the eternal, conversation with portrait shooters. And for me, I'm not always in search of soft light, because sometimes I think hard light's going to produce a better picture if the subject really demands that. Whereas soft light can be the exact right answer for other things. The important part is to know how to produce each one of those things. The size of the light source in relation to the size of the subject is what dictates softness. So if you have a really giant light source, which you would think of as soft, but you put it far back, it becomes much smaller in relation to the subject, and so it gets hard. Where I can take if I have a small subject and put a bare light very close to it, I'm going to have soft light because in relation, it is soft. What am I talking about when I say hard versus soft? Hard light produces strong contrasty shadows, lots of detail. Soft light, smooth lines and edges. How do we get soft light or hard light? Well, we use modifiers. When I talk about modifiers, I'm talking about something that we put in front of our light to control where it goes, how big it is, and where it's going to fall off. Umbrellas are the entry level, inexpensive, easy to travel with. They diffuse the light. They're great, but their downside is that they're inexpensive and that they throw light everywhere. Umbrellas are that one that you're probably going to replace a little bit, but they're so cheap that it's okay. If you're shooting indoors and you want to control where the light's going, an umbrella is probably not the best choice. If you're going to shoot near a wall, near a background, the light might go everywhere. Whereas a softbox can give you a lot more control. You can grid it. You can they come in all different sizes. You can really go where the light's going to go. There's pocket boxes, which are just small soft boxes. There's also domes and all other kinds of things like that. And there's grids, which we can attach to the fronts of our flashes or the fronts of our deflectors or onto our soft boxes to make sure that our light stays soft but is more directional. Let's start with bare light. So this guy, you already saw one picture of him, and this is the Great Wall of China, and I see this guy, and I am not interested in getting rid of any of his wrinkles. I want to accentuate them. So I hand the speed light off to another tourist, tell them to move back, aim it at him, shoot the picture, and accentuate all those wrinkles because it's part of the story. The guy looks like he was there to build the Great Wall. I don't want to get rid of any of that. But now if we go the other way, to the other side of this, we have situations where we want really soft, natural looking light. And then one of the easy ways to get this, especially if you can put your subject in open shade, is within a big umbrella, very close to your subject. In this case, it's half an inch outside the frame. She's an open shadow. I don't have anything behind her that I'm worried about the light hitting and lighting up. There's enough distance. So that's going to give me a really soft quality of light. And I tend to, even when I'm going soft, to use kind of extreme angles because I still want definition. So I want that little bit of shadow under her chin on camera left. Some people are not going to want that. They're going to put the light closer to the front to make it a little bit more glamorous, a little more soft. You'll see throughout this that I do that, and I do it on purpose, because I like the way that the definition of her jawline comes out that way. That light that you see on her shoulder to camera left, that's the sun behind her. You'll see throughout this that a lot of the time when I shoot outside, I put the sun behind my subject. It makes it so that they don't squint or blink at me. It gives me a free light source that I don't have to pay for that's going to give me some light that I need. I tend to do that a lot. Now, here's two pictures in a row that are going to be the same softbox but used completely different ways. Size of the light source compared to the size of the subject dictates how hard it is. So this is my Rapid Box M, my medium one. I have it as far back as I can in this room for one reason and one reason only. This woman had just turned 50, went to the gym. I don't want to take away the definition of her arms. I don't want to take away her hard jawline. I want those to be accentuated so that she gets to show off what she's worked for. If I use an umbrella, I would have filled in all of that, and it would have still been a pretty picture. She would have still looked nice. She's an attractive woman. But I would have taken away some of that, and it's not the story I wanted to tell. That same exact softbox, though, now put very close to the subject, right in front of her, it's going to give me a totally different quality of light. There's nothing different between those two pictures as far as modifiers. It's just where I put the light. Here is one of those like, hey, revel in failure, make lots of mistakes and learn from them. So I was going for really natural light here. I was going for I wanted it to look like I just found a nice pocket of light, put her in it, took the pictures. But that's not, this is next to, I think this is the Williamsburg Bridge, but it could be the Manhattan Bridge. I can't remember, because the area looks different now. But if you take a close look at this picture, if you were able to zoom in on it, you'd notice that the catch lights in her eyes are square, and you would see that there's a hard shadow right in front of her shoes that's coming from that square softbox that I used, or rectangular. Normally when I'm outside, I tend to want to use an umbrella or an octabox, which is going to be round. It's going to be a nice round catch light. It's going to be a nice round fall off. So this was a mistake that I made, but I learned from it. I never did that again. You can make really soft light even with something like a pocket box. In this case, there's still a lot of shadows because I went so hard to the camera left. Yeah, but it's a graduated, nice, soft shadow. It's, how do I do that? Put it very close to the subject, as close as I can, and then take the picture. Somebody told me this. So I told you before that my favorite quote in photography is, the first 10,000 are your worst. Well, another photographer said this: every flash image is two separate exposures. And if somebody had explained this to me a long time ago, I really would be better at what I'm doing today. And there's a lot of room for that. But this picture is at f4, 1/12/50th of a second. This same picture is in the same exact spot a couple of seconds later, f4 at 1/125th of a second. This is in Central Park. And the only difference is how much ambient light I'm letting in. The light that's on the subjects is the same. I'm adding that. The only thing that's different, because it's two separate exposures, it's almost like an HDR picture, where I'm exposing for him based off the light that I put there, and I'm exposing the rest of the shot based off of what I can't control, the ambient light. Whether I want it to be totally dark or I want it to be a really important part of the picture, I control that. There's a few examples with that. For whatever reason, I wanted to shoot 1.4. Obviously I could have stopped down. I wanted to shoot 1.4. 3/20th of a second is what aperture priority told me was correctly exposed. It's obviously not. It's blown out in the background. The blue dress is right. Your skin tones are pretty close to right. It's not flattering. It's hard light. It's not great. So I go to 1/5000th of a second, and it gives me this. Now the background might be too dark, but I really wanted to tame that sky and get it to be a little bit better. And then I added one light. This is the FJ 200 with the 43-inch softbox umbrella, soft silver. And not only does it make the skin tone look better, not only does it make because I'm underexposed so much that the dress actually looks better, the colors are better, but it makes her happy. She already knows this is a better picture even without seeing it. Waking up early, we're photographers, we tend to chase that sunrise sometimes, or at least I do. And when you get out there, but the best shot is with the sun behind your subject, that could break your heart if you don't have lights. But in this case, I'm at 5.6, I'm at 3/20th. It gives me really nice colors in the sky. 5.6, 3/20th. Add the FJ 400 with the Octo L, and end up with a picture like this. Every picture is two separate exposures when you're using light. There's the light on my subject. There's the light for the background. All right. Depending on where I'm teaching this class, there's a different number of steps. Tonight, it's not going to be 3 steps. You guys get a bonus step. You get a 4th step. I think that you guys probably mostly understand the 4th step. You actually might get 5 steps tonight. I'm feeling, I think you guys are going to get 5. So one of the questions I get all the time is what ISO should I pick? And for most of my portrait work, most of the time, I'm shooting at base ISO, whether that's 100 or 64 or 200, depending on the camera. I shoot at my base ISO. Unless there's a couple of times that I don't. And those reasons are mostly have to do with shooting conditions or with me being dumb. If I need more power, so if I've got a 400 watt light, but I really need 800 watts out of it, if I raise the ISO by 1 stop, I can get more power out of that same light. That's really important for 200s and speed lights. But, even with a 400, sometimes there's not enough power if I'm shooting like a big group shot. I got to stop down. So raising the ISO is going to give me more power out of the same strobe. If I needed to recycle faster, when I shoot concerts and I use strobes, I oftentimes will shoot those at 800 or at 1600 so that the strobe can keep up with me at 10 frames a second or 12 frames a second, because I make some hyperlapse movies out of them at some point. So that is another thing, that's why I might raise my ISO away from base. This is the one that has to do with me being an idiot. I have 1 or 2 times in my life realized too late that I did not recharge the batteries all the way. Okay, well, by raising my ISO, I can keep my flash at the same power, but get more battery life, because I can turn down the flash power to get the same amount. So I just know that I just confused myself. If I was at full power at 1:1 at ISO 100, I could be at half power at 200. I could be at quarter power at 400, and so on and so forth. So I get a lot more battery life out of my batteries if I somehow forget to recharge them, or if I need to affect the ambient exposure. This last one is, I think you guys all understand it right away. I usually have to spend a ton of time trying to explain this to really entry-level people. So this is the only picture in the whole thing that has a lot of Photoshop. We've all been to a birthday party, a going away party, hanging out at the bar, whatever, and we've taken a picture like this. Our shutter speed is fast enough that the only thing that gets lit is the person that's closest to the flash. In this case, I'm shooting a band in a bar, ISO 100, 200th of a second shutter speed. Now, if I want more ambient light, I could lower my shutter speed. But if I lower my shutter speed, the band becomes a blur. The singer's going to be sharp no matter what, because the fast flash duration is going to keep him sharp. So what can I do? I can raise the ISO. So if I raise the ISO, in this case, I went to 400. It makes the room read as though I'd shot it at a 50th. It makes it brighter, but I still get the action freezing properties of the 200th of a second. Like I said, the singer's going to be sharp under what? Because he's close to the light. He's being froze by the flash. All right. Lens selection directly affects the next step. And you guys all get this, so I'm going to go through this fast. I'm not talking about brand versus brand or fast aperture versus slow aperture, prime versus zoom. I'm talking focal length. Why am I talking focal length? I'm going to give you guys a secret. I'm going to let you in. The next step is aperture. And why is focal length so important to aperture? Because focal length and aperture combine together to control depth of field. So here's a 1635 f4 thousandth of a second. I think I'm going to make a good picture, and I make a pretty bad picture. But what's important to notice here is that even at f4 with that wide lens, the Brooklyn Bridge is relatively sharp. The Verizon building in the back is relatively sharp. Can make them out. But there's nothing else about this picture that's good. The 1635 wasn't flattering. The light was in the bad spot. I messed up everything else. This is a test shot. So what can I do? I'm going to change focal length. But when I change focal length, I also, if I want to have the background stay in focus, have to really change my aperture quite a bit. Change the light, change the lens. F4, gave me a Brooklyn Bridge that was actually sharper than the Brooklyn Bridge here is at F10 with the 105. But that compression means that now anybody who looks at this picture that maybe isn't from the Northeast goes, oh, that's the Brooklyn Bridge. It's really clear now. They might think that it's the Roebling Bridge, but no. In any event, more flattering all the way around. Lens selection goes a long way. Why? Because aperture controls the depth of field in my world. If you guys have listened to enough people teach lighting over the years, you've heard the maxim that shutter controls the ambient light and aperture controls the flash. And this is very true, that if I was in the middle of a shoot and I was at 2.8 and I thought that my subject was too bright, I could go to 3.5 or f4 and they would get darker. The light would not be as bright. But I would have also changed the depth of field and I would have also changed the ambient. So in a world where I can easily change my light from my remote, I've decided that aperture for me when I shoot lit lights is 100% about the depth of field, because that's a creative decision. It's the first creative decision I have to make so that the people that see this picture when I'm not around know where to look. The light's also going to go a long way towards that, obviously, but depth of field for me is totally creative decision. How much depth of field I let into a shot is going to tell the people exactly where to look. Sometimes I want it very shallow. Sometimes I want it very deep. I'm not here to say one's better than the other, but for creative control, I'm going to pick how much aperture based on what I want in the picture to be sharp. And just keeping in mind always that 2.8 on a 20mm lens, almost everything's in focus. 2.8 on a 105, very little's in focus. I know you guys get this, so thank you for bearing and keeping patience with me as I go through this. But there's always somebody that likes to hear this and needs to hear it, and I hope that somebody was like, that makes a lot of sense. So aperture, shutter speed controls my ambient light. So any light that's in the scene that I'm not adding to the picture is going to be controlled with my shutter speed. This is a 40th, then we go to a 100th, then we go to a 640th. If I'd have got this down to a 1250th or a 2500th, we would have seen no light in the picture that wasn't put there by me. Shutter speed can have a big difference with very minor changes. But I like to think in stops, and I think you guys probably do too. For me, I'm going to look at this, I'm going to go, that's all right, but it's probably 2 stops overexposed, maybe even a little more. So quarter second gave me the motion that I wanted, but it really didn't fit her style, didn't fit Radio City. I was like, all right, so what can I do? Well, I can go to 1/25th. So a 4th to an 8th to a 16th to a 25th. 2.5 stops. F9 stayed the same because I thought my depth of field was fine. But 24 to 70, I'm at around 70 millimeters, because I wanted a little bit of shallow depth of field, a little separation, but we can see everything in the background. That changed, those 2.5 stops makes an enormous change. So when I'm talking about shutter speed, you rarely will hear me, if I'm teaching this class live, go, what shutter speed do you think you need? I'll be like, all right, so we've got the light in this room at normal exposure. Do you think it's too bright? Do you think, and they'll go, yes. And I'll go, how many stops? And they go, I don't know. Is it twice as bright as you want it? Is it 4 times as bright as you want it? They'll guess, and we'll roll in the shutter speed difference, and we get the picture we want. I don't know if many of you guys, maybe some of you guys know Skip. He's from Albany. Great horse photographer. Albany Times says, hey, can you teach us how to do portraits with speedlights? Sure. Where do they put us? In the cafeteria. The land of choking hazard signs and HR memos. Nothing interesting. And if you guys work professionally and you get sent someplace, a lot of times the background's not what you want it to be. And the easiest thing to do, rather than carry a background with you, is just get rid of the background. It's not always going to work. Sometimes they want a white or a gray background. Well, then you got something else you got to do. But if you've got any room with any kind of space, you could turn any space into a black background. This case, 2.8 was how much aperture I wanted. 2500th of a second gave me the black frame. Then I add the light. All the light in the picture is coming from my softbox. It's a real extreme version of that. A couple of years ago, when I first went down to Florida to help out with the Mets, after a day and a half of seeing me shoot while we were setting up, they were like, hey, do you want to do some pictures? I was like, yeah. So I've got a couple of speed lights with me. I've got a couple of little mods. I got my camera. I don't have a backdrop. They didn't have a backdrop. They gave me this room. So 1.6 was the aperture I had decided on, because they said, we want shallow, because they had, one of the other photographers for the Mets doing the standard f8, 3 lights, everything's a focus picture. So they were like, yeah, do something really dramatic, edgy. I'm like, okay, so I'll go 1.6. I go to 15th of a second to give me a quote unquote correct exposure. But I wanted something like this. So instead I shot that at 1/160th. Didn't even have to go to high speed sync. But there's a big difference between 15th and 1/60th. 15th to a 30th, to a 60th, to a 1/20th, to 1/60th. So we're 3 1/3 stops. By moving him out away from the background, and by using some creative, towels to block the light. So my main light in this is a 1x3 rapid box strip to camera left. I've got another speed light up above him with a grid to give me that hair light, and I've got a reflector to camera right to fill in the other side of him just a little bit, because that's what I had. So by moving him far enough back, and by putting a flag to the side of the strip, it wasn't a real flag, it was a towel that we hung there, that kept the light from spilling to the background and lighting that. I was able to make this picture and these pictures, and there we go. Really shallow, really, admittedly, probably too shallow. But this is what they wanted. They wanted something totally different than what they were already doing. This is one of these ones where, I take the picture, there's nothing wrong with the picture, it's fine. But there's nothing in the background that's yelling out to me that this is super important. And I think this picture is going to look better if I underexpose it. I like to underexpose a lot of my pictures, makes the colors pop, makes them more dynamic, and that's a style I like a lot of the time. So 6:29 p.m., 1/60th of a second. 6:33, I'm at 1,000th of a second. I haven't moved anything else. We moved a little bit where they were standing, like 8 feet. But a totally different picture because I've changed shutter speed and nothing else. If I needed more or less depth of field, I can make that change. I don't mean to tell people that just to pick an aperture and stick with it. But remember, if you change aperture because you want to change your depth of field, that's a universal change. And you have to reflect that in the power of your lights or in your shutter speed. And this is the last step, which is add the light. And it sounds very trite and very, like, oh yeah, just add the light. It's that easy. If you follow those other steps and you remember that every picture that you take with lights is 2 separate exposures, and you remember to control your depth of field, then to control your ambient light, when you come time to add the light, even if you start at the very basic 45 degrees up and 45 degrees to your side, you will feel a lot more comfortable exploring that, being creative with that, figuring out, maybe you've got a few different modifiers with you. Maybe you want to try a bare one. You want to try like a snoot. If you've started with that skeleton and you've built a really great solid foundation of where you're going to begin as far as your depth of field and your control of your ambient light, then figuring out how to be creative and to make a really cool picture when you've added the light later on is easier. You know, I was blessed to be around Joe McNally and Jerry Gionis and Joey Terrell and some geniuses with light. And because they're geniuses, you know, none of them broke it down that easy for me and made me have that moment that it clicked. I really had that moment on my own. And that's not to be like, ooh, hooray for me. It's to say, I hope that somebody else that already is pretty good at lighting heard that and said, huh, I never heard it put that way. That makes a lot of sense. Where I put the lights, especially if I'm going to use multiple lights, is really case by case. You know, I know that sounds like a cop-out, but, you know, I'm going to start with one. I'm going to work that. Then if I feel like I need a second light, that's when I'm going to kick that in. And then usually I'm going to turn off my main light and see how that other light interacts with my subject without the benefit of the other light, of the main light, then work from there. So let's sum that up. Aperture controls the depth of field. Shutter controls the ambient light. You control light. I mean, there's long versions of this class where we get into TTL versus manual. We talk about inverse square law. We talk about a lot of other stuff. And that's all cool stuff to talk about. For the record, I 99% of the time shoot manual on my flashes, not because I'm cool or because I'm smart, but because TTL tends to make people blink because of the pre-flash, because it eats up battery life, and because it's not quite as consistent as manual. It's not bad. It's better than it's ever been. But I like to have just repetition, same shot over and over, especially if I'm really getting the subject to go through a lot of poses. I don't want that pre-flash. And I've just worked with too many people where the pre-flash makes people blink. So that's why I happen to do that. We're going to talk about inverse square law a tiny bit in a couple of seconds, but you know, this is the basics of it for me. If I start here, I can spend more time being creative. So this is process part 2, where I kind of spend a little bit of time repeating myself and showing you some more behind the scenes stuff, and you know, hoping that, you know, I can convince you guys that this makes sense and that you should, you know, go try this out, make some pictures. So that Apollo orb, like I told you, it was my gateway, and it's something that I still use. So this is in Virginia. This is James River. It was running. I'm 6'5". The light was over my belly button. The water, not the light, the water. And I look at this picture and I like it. And I say to myself, man, I really would have liked the sky to be a little bit more under control. It's a little blown out. But the challenge was that the water was running so fast that I could really only run one light. I just couldn't risk putting lights all over the place. And so I wanted that one light to hit the subjects, to look relatively natural, not look like a spotlight. And I didn't want shadows. If you look all the way to camera left, and if you look to camera center, where there's a shadow from the tree, I didn't want those spots to get so dark that it was just clear that this was lit. Because there's no way you would have shadows on this side and have them lit. You know, anybody who's really smart still looks at it, knows it's lit. But I wanted it to kind of feel like that could have just been a pocket of light. So if I went to 800th of a second or 1600th of a second, 2 stops more, to get the sky better, to get the green in the trees to be richer, I would have made the front here so dark that it wouldn't have looked natural at all. This is just one of those, remember, long lenses have very shallow depth of field. I mean, this is a 500 millimeter at f11. I still had to line them up so that their heads were on the same plane. That tree and that power line in the back are out. You know, f11 has very little depth of field at minimum focusing distance at 500 millimeters, where 10 minutes later, I've got the kid on the left over here with a 20 millimeter. And at f5, if you could zoom in enough, you know, you could see cars on the road behind him. Like it's, so f5 has got tons of depth of field when I'm using a 20 millimeter lens. I think you guys all know this inherently, but it's definitely something that I know even for me, I had to really really take into account, especially if you're going to use speed lights or 200 watt lights that are less powerful. Being able to shoot at f5 or f4 or even 2.8 with something that's relatively wide, and just accepting in your head that I'm going to have enough depth of field here, means that you can turn the flashes down and have enough power to overcome the sun. This is one light. And, on a day where I'm shooting 2500th of a second with one light at f5, the light's really close. It's right here, just out of the frame, to keep it relatively soft. But it makes, the more that I can stop down wide open, I'm making my lights more powerful. F9, 1,000th of a second, gives me some sky. Then just as much light as I can get on her from the front to light her up and separate that. I'm fighting against midday sun in the desert. It was a challenging situation. I made a decent picture. Here's 2 FJ 400s, fishing for mermaids, totally catch and release. No mermaids were injured during the course of this. I've got the 2 lights, and I'm going for sort of an even look here, a more glamorous look. But what's really important to notice is how hard that sun is behind her. You see it on the tail, on her hair. So I really need to overcome a ton of power. Again, I've put the sun behind her because I like the way it's going to give me a free hair light. I don't have to worry about hiding a light behind her. This is one of my other tricks that I'll pull, especially in a challenging situation. I've got tripods for light stands because I know they're not going to fall over in the water that's running. So just put the 1/4-20 with one of those little baby pins on it and slide my light on it. The beauty of the flip out screen, for me, is that I can get that low angle and take a picture that looks like this with no light, no flash added, but still lots of background sunlight. And instead, come out with something like that by adding those 2 lights. That's why I need to throw so much light. I really didn't want a lot of shadows falling to the left because I really was looking for something that was kind of a mix of glamour, but also this weird, fantastical situation. All right, so I promised you we'd talk about inverse square laws. So for the math geeks and lighting people out there, we'll talk about it a little bit. So I got a relatively big light source, which is going to give me soft light if I put it really close to my subject. Inverse square law says that the fall off happens really quick. So every time we double the distance from our subject, we quarter the amount of light. Now that in itself is like pretty easy to understand. Maybe you don't expect it to be a quarter, but you're like, yeah, I move the light back, it gets weaker. That makes sense. The other part that you need to take into play here, though, which comes to play in this picture, but also will come into play if you guys want to group pictures where you can't line them up side by side. If you've got 2 deep, 3 deep, 5 deep, the farther back you move your light, the more even the exposure will be between the front and the back. So if you need the first person and the person that's 5 rows back to be equally lit or close to equally lit, you need to take your light source and move it far back. Remember that every time you move it back, it's getting less powerful. It's also getting harder. So you might need more. That's why when we shoot group photos, obviously we throw a ton of light out there in big softboxes or big umbrellas. But where it plays in this picture is, he's got his style, which is kind of edgy. If I put the softbox really close to him, I'm going to get really soft light that's going to fall off really fast. Means that if I put it close to him and I shoot it at what I plan to do, which is 8,000th of a second to overcome the sun, I don't want the sun to be part of the picture, I'm going to lose the rivets on the door. So instead I move it a little farther back and I maintain some edge with him, which helps kind of convey the story that he's got going on with his look. But it also lets the light spread out a little bit and let me get those rivets to be sharp. So I go to 8,000th, move the light a little bit back, get those shadows in, maintain all that sharpness from shooting the flash, keep the colors rich, but the light gets a chance to spread out. The shadow behind his head is dark, but it's not black. You can still see the rivet. Where if I had to put the light close to make it a softer light source, first off, it doesn't play well to him. Secondly, the rivets to camera right would disappear, and that pocket of shadow behind his head would be black. Something I didn't necessarily want in that situation. Again, one light, pocket box. This is just me being out with a friend of mine who happened to have a head of great hair. And, you know, I blew these out a little bit. I'm looking at them now, and like, there's going to have to come a time where I pull these out of the presentation. You know, when I first started showing these, it was just really to show you what you could do with one light and just like a small little softbox, like a tiny softbox that folds flat. I didn't want her to blink. I didn't want to put sunglasses on her. I wanted that hair light that's coming from the sun to separate her hair from the background. And so I was really left with like not a lot of other choices, but to put her back to the sun, get these shots that really highlight her hair and fill her face in with as much light as I could get my hands on. You know, I took these, you know, with one speed light and my rapid box, my pocket box is why it still makes the cut to get into my Westcott class. But I recognize that it's a little blown out. So if you guys are looking at it and you're going, oh, that's not really a great example, I understand that. But it's still here to show you what you can do with one speed light if you put it close enough to the subject, even when you put bright sun behind them. Another little story about controlling light, 1/1000th of a second compared to 1/2500th of a second. So it's just 1.5 more stops, but it really changes the whole feel of the picture. A lot more drama, a lot more contrast. You know, just changes everything. Rio, the beach, the ocean behind, put her in open shade because I wanted to light her and control the light on her, whereas she was squinting really badly, and it was not a great quality of light in the sun. So I have 2 speed lights and an umbrella. That's what I've got. I'm in Rio not to go shoot portraits, but I've got stuff. F2, 8,000th tames the beach just enough where we can kind of make out that it's tan. It makes the water slightly blue, but the 2 lights added to it give us this picture instead. You know, so that little umbrella off to camera right, the bear strobe behind her, lights up some of the flag, puts the light on her wrist and on her bikini, on her arm a little bit, really separates her from the background. Like I said, I don't do a lot of posts, you know, I leave whatever's in there, you know, but a much more dynamic picture just because I happen to have 2 speedlights with me. You'll hear me talk, you know, there's so many of these pictures are high speed sync, fast aperture. That's not always what I want. You know, there's times where, you know, this is a friend, some of my friends, they have a band, they're playing that night. Hey, can you get a portrait? Sure. F13 gives me the depth of field that I need. Once I've picked that informs the next decision, which is shutter speed to control the ambient light. I'm not worried about my lights yet. 2/50th of a second at F13 gives me the sky that I want, and it gives me, you know, at various times I can kind of see the junkyard behind them, but once they're standing there, I can't. And then add the light. You know, in this case, I got 1 umbrella, 1 bare light, and it's not perfect, but it's a lot better than what they expected when we went into it. This is just here for the people who hear me go, pick an aperture, and they think that means that I'm basically telling them, pick an aperture and just stick with the aperture no matter what. That's not what I mean. ISO 100, f4, 200th of a second gave me this picture. It's Tim Hardaway Jr. He's flat. The ball's flat with his head. I don't need a lot of depth of field here. Don't need a lot of shutter speed to control the ambient. But then I wanted to play with depth of field a little bit. So once I do that, I need to make sure that I change other things because it's universal. So F4, I go down to 1/4. So 2/8, F2, 1/4 is 3 stops, 200th to 400th to 800th. And then I went a little bit more to 12/50th, you know, because I wanted even a little more drama. But I'm not ever telling people stick with one aperture. I mean, pick an aperture to control depth of field. In this case, I didn't want the ball to be sharp. I just wanted the emotion on his face, but to know it was a basketball. Wedding shot. By this point, the bride was miserable. You know, anybody who's ever shot weddings knows that there comes that point in every wedding. And I grab her. I said, listen, look at this background. It's going to look really cool. And she turned around and she looked and she's like, I don't see it. I said, just give me 3 minutes. Put the sun straight behind her. You know, but the sun's not straight behind her, but hard to camera left. Underexposed that background by a ton. I wanted the greens to be rich, the shadows to be dark so she really stood out. You know, get that light shadow light kind of thing going on. The underexposed colors were going to make the flowers look better. The underexposed and the light coming from slightly to the side was going to give more detail in the dress. And the aperture is picked because nobody cares about the groom. Just nobody cares. This is her day. It's all about her. It's all about her dress. And I show her that one picture, and then she gave me 10 more minutes to do more pictures. But this was the first one. Put that Rapid Box medium, the Octa, to give me a nice catch light, to give me a nice soft light, as close as I can. He gets hit with the 2x3 because that's what I had. He's got a lot of sunlight on his face, which kind of makes it look like he's split light. But really, it's about her. She's happy. We get good pictures after that. Another split light case, 2 FJ400s, one Octa medium, one 1x3, just to the sides. Super shallow depth of field because what was behind was a school that was really unattractive. It just was right across the street from her house, and I was like, all right, that doesn't look good. What can we do? And so I was like, let me get rid of the background. Let me use depth of field to do that, and then let's control everything else. 1600th, too much light on the background. It's just like a really bright day. I go to 8000th, go really extreme, and end up here. And end up here. Screens run bright. If it looks blown out to you guys, I apologize. It's not the real picture. On my screen, it looks a little hot right now. Oh, and that's why. Because I have my screen overexposed. All right, there we go. Just making drama, isolating my subject, telling the story that I want to tell. Umbrella and a bare light. That bare light really helps the one that I put behind her. I don't love the way the light feels on the ground down by her feet. I'll be the first to say that. But I also know that if I don't have that speed light back there aimed at her, that her head gets lost in the brick, her dress gets lost in the steps, her arms get lost. The speed light, when we talked earlier before, the one that's in the umbrella, we talked about not just amount, but direction. Even though I'm using a big, soft umbrella, very close to the subject, it is really far to camera right, so that I get some of that shadow on camera left on her cheekbone and gives her definition. The girl's got amazing, she's got cheekbones that could cut through something. I want to show that off. If I make that too soft by putting the light in front, I'm going to lose that definition. I don't want to do that. 1/400th of a second, 3.5. If I took those light stands out, there'd be nothing wrong with the picture. But I knew that if I added lights, I could make a better picture. So you see the two that are here. There's my orb. There's my Octa medium. There's another one that's going to be in the final picture that's going to light the back of the Jeep. I only say Jeep to piss off the guy who owns it. It's really a Land Rover. He gets upset when I say Jeep. And we end up here. 2500th of a second compared to 400th of a second. Aperture, I changed it a little bit, a third of a stop. And I threw a little bit of light on the back of the Land Rover. Storm came through after this. We kind of packed up. I think that I would have liked to throw more light on the back of the Land Rover, but process never changes for me. And the important part to me about that process is that if I've picked out the parts that I can have total control over, that I know what they're doing, because I have a lifetime of experience making mistakes as a photographer, picking apertures and shutter speeds, then adding the lights gets so much easier, because once I've got those things down, I can take the picture, look, go, it looks pretty good, but maybe if I do this. It lets me be so much more creative because I've started with that good foundation. Something I've been playing with a little bit lately, that I've always played with to a certain extent, but even getting more into it lately, is just using flash duration to freeze things. Everybody knows that, or most people know that speed lights are named speed lights because they have a very fast flash duration. So even if you're using a slow shutter speed, the flash duration is going to freeze the action. So this is what makes them really useful for events where you don't necessarily want that look of a black background. You want the background to show up. That means that you can shoot at a 40th of a second or a 30th of a second or even slower if you really wanted to, and the flash itself is going to freeze your subjects. Well, in this case, Zoe and I had some water balloons, and I was like, hey, let's go play with these and let's see what we can do. So 200th of a second let me stay in normal sync, which gives me more power out of my flashes, because when you go to high-speed sync, you lose some power. But it also means that I could turn down the power on my strobes. The lower the power on the strobes, the faster the flash duration is. The flash duration is the amount of time that it takes for the light to come from being off to being at max power to being off again. And at less power, that I don't know if you guys can see me, but it peaks very fast. Whereas when you have higher power, it's more of a bell curve. So by doing that, even at 200th of a second, which is way slower than I would use to shoot action normally, we're able to get something like this because the flash is freezing each piece of the water. The flash is freezing that. And where I learned this day, revel in failure, was that I would have liked to have shot this picture at 5.6. Because some of that water that looks blurry isn't blurry because of motion. It's blurry because it's out of focus because I'm shooting at 2.5. So in the future, there'll be a better example of this. And maybe I got goggles for Zoe so she can keep her eyes open. But yeah, there's that. So every rule needs something to prove it the other way. In this case, I had to start with time. 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, I start with aperture. But every now and again, I have to start with time, and then I have to count on the flash duration to freeze the person, even though we're doing a long exposure. So in this case, it's a 4-second exposure. After a couple of test runs, that was the amount of time that made the spinning spark wool look right. F10 controlled the bonfire in the background relatively well. And then the strobes came on and froze Gabe, made sure that he was frozen. And, that gives me this shot. I could take it even a step further than that and still get frozen shots in the middle of motion, in the middle of all this, because of flash duration again. Here's my friend Mark Kedenhofen. In this case, we're in a totally dark room. I set the camera up on a tripod, set it for 10 seconds. I say, hey, Mark, can you give me a swing like my favorite golfer of all time, Happy Gilmore? And he goes, yeah. And I have a strobe at either side, 180 degrees to him either way. And if you look at him in the middle, you can see that both those strobes are hitting him. He's split light, like he's got a little Time Man of the Year kind of thing going on. We put some glow sticks on the golf club, and during the course of 10 seconds, he slowly goes through this swing, and I set off the strobe 3 times. This is all taken in camera, one shot. Dave Black inspired this. Like, this was definitely something I learned the idea from him, but me doing it with speed lights and with more motion in the middle was kind of my own stupid take on it. One of the things I love about the system and love about lighting these days is that ability to change which lights are on, how much power is going to each light, using all the groups, and being able to really, with one setup, get multiple different types of shots. So this is my friend Lucas. He's shooting some hockey. The funny part is that I can't stand the cold and I can't skate. So this whole thing is really hard for me, but I love shooting it. It's a lot of fun. So I got 3 lights in this setup. You can see all 3 here. There's one to his right. There's one that's low that's aimed at the snow that's going to be kicking up and getting all over my lens. And then there's the big softbox that's going to cover as much space as I can get it to cover, on him. And with that setup, I end up with this shot. I left the other strobe in. I'm at 500th of a second because the flash duration is going to freeze them. 14 millimeters, really extend that look, make it look more dynamic. But then I was like, I think this might look cool if I make it even more edgy. He's got the spiked hair in this picture. He's got very sharp jaw lines. So I turn off the main light. I just leave the 2 hard lights and, end up with something like this, without having to get up, without having to move anything, just all the settings stayed the same. I'm almost done, guys. Thank you for your patience. I really appreciate it. I love, thank you, Justin, and thank you guys for having me. So whether I'm shooting people or I'm shooting ferrets, it's the same process. Depth of field. I went F8 here because I knew the ferret wouldn't sit still. 200th of a second gave me a black frame, and I put the camera real close to him, so he's still slightly got some fall off in bokeh, even though we're at F8. And, end up with these pictures. But he does not want to look at me. He does not care about me. Get the star of the show to come over. She also wants nothing to do with me because we're using food to get them to stay. And so that's it. But the important part is the process doesn't change. I'm shooting jellyfish, dogs, ferrets, doesn't make a difference. Pick an aperture for depth of field. Pick a shutter speed to control the ambient light. In this case, this is one of those round tanks that are in the aquariums now. So F4, 2000th of a second, is a black frame. all the light that's in this picture is coming from the speed light. In this case, straight behind the jellyfish. Zoe's mom, me, Zoe, we're on a trip. I've always got something with me. In this case, wide angle lens. So 2.8 aperture gives me plenty of depth of field. 4,000 of a second gave me window detail instead of the sky being totally blown out. People are always like, well, why didn't you go to 8,000 of a second? The building would have looked better. The sky would have looked more dynamic. And they're not wrong. But I did shoot a picture at 8,000th, and all the wood pylons the camera left went totally dark. So I had to kind of balance that. I only had the pocket box with me. So I didn't have anything to make really great soft light. So I take that light, I put it on top of the pylon, put it as close to her as I can, because the size of the light source in relation to the size of the subject is what gives me softness. So it's not super soft, but it's soft enough to make a decent picture. So why do I carry my speed lights with me, or my strobes? In this case, it's speed lights all the time. Well, because sometimes you get lemon light, and sometimes even if you can't make a great picture, you can save the day, and saving the day sometimes leads to better opportunities for you. So when I went to Rio in 2016, I envisioned the greatest time lapse of Christ the Redeemer ever. And when I got there, I realized that Christ the Redeemer is the top of a rainforest, and it spends a lot of time looking like this. I was like, oh, okay. And there's my picture. And I was pretty disappointed, and everybody that was there was pretty disappointed. And I had one day off in Rio, so I waited as long as I could, and, got this, but I would never show this picture if it wasn't for this class. So if your initials are JC and you're Christ the Redeemer, what do? Well, you start messing around, because you've got a tripod with you because you were going to make this awesome time lapse, and you've got a little softbox, and you've got your speed light. So you put it on top of the tripod, and you start lighting some pictures. And people see you doing what you're doing, and they're like, what are you doing? And they come over and they go, hey, can you take pictures of us? So I do. And there's always that little guy who wants to show off. And then when you're a big fat, Yeti guy, you got to go, yo, I can get up. I got ups. And, you're laying on the ground shooting those pictures, and you see out of the corner of your eye a flash of color, and you scream, basically, go get her. And, your friend from Nikon Australia goes over and chats up this nice person and says, hey, come on over here. You look really sad about this. I'm really sad. This is my only time ever in Rio. And that's my voice for the subject. And they bring them over, and you make lemonade out of that lemon light. And in this case, it's not a great picture. Not a great picture. But compared to the cell phone pictures that she was making of herself, and compared to any picture I would have made if I didn't have the lights, it's pretty good. So I see this girl. She got the flag. She's there. We start chatting. She's there with her boyfriend at the time. Turns out she lives in New York. I live in New York. Turns out she's on America's Next Top Model. Wow, that's awesome. Hey, I got some new bikinis that they gave me. I really need some pictures. I was hoping to get them done in Brazil. Sure, I'll meet you at the beach tomorrow with the 10514 and take some pictures of you, which you saw some of those pictures already. And like, hey, when we get back to New York, we should shoot. Sure. We shoot a couple of times. You've seen some of those pictures. Then she's like, hey, I'm getting married. Can you shoot those pictures? I do. Shoot those. Now she's pregnant, and she's coming back up to New York she lives in Florida now, but she's coming up in June. And she's like, hey, can you take my maternity pictures? I can. And all that happened because I had my strobe with me. And that is the end of this presentation, which ends with a picture of Z, because it's my presentation and she's awesome. She's my kid. And I want to say thank you guys. I've done a lot of things over the years with various ASMP charters, and this is my first time with Pittsburgh, and I want to say thank you guys. And I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to stop sharing so I can actually see you guys. There we go. I hope you picked something up. I hope that it wasn't a complete waste of all your time. Jen, I appreciate the silent clapping. It makes me happy. I appreciate that. If anybody here is interested, has a question about lighting, about Westcott, I can still answer a Nikon question on occasion. If you have a Nikon question and you don't know who your rep is now, I'm happy to do my best at that, but it's definitely not my strong suit these days. Hit me up. I will put my email in the chat.
We also have 2 questions in the chat.
I will get to them in 1 second. You are a rock star, my friend. I love that you got your Met hat.
And my New York as fuck t-shirt.
I got my Met hat too, but it's black on black. That's how the season's making me feel. You know, they won today twice. So
Nice.
don't hesitate to write me. If you've got a question, I'll answer it. I answer the email early. Come join the Westcott user group on Facebook. You know, questions get answered there really fast, either by me or somebody else who's smart. And if you are interested in getting some lights or something, hit me up before you buy them. I'll see what I can do. You know, I can't make any guarantees. I asked Justin, you guys don't have your own store that sponsors you, or I would have tried to work something out with them. But if you feel like you really need something, I will do my best to get it for you guys at a small discount. But, you know, I'll try to make it worth your while because you came here and you listened to me. So let me see. Does it work with Leica? Yes. Panasonic Leica are on the same setup. It will work. Various Leica cameras, depending on when they came out, I can't guarantee you high-speed sync, but it'll definitely work. And it will work in high-speed sync most of the time. Nice to see you again. Hey, Shelly. How are you? You're. I like your picture, but I would have liked to have seen you. But
Hi, how are you?
I'm good,
Long
Shelly.
time no see.
Yep, been a while.
Yeah, thanks. So nice to know. Great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. What's the difference between a round face and a rectangular face on a speedlight? That's a good question. So, speedlights, by their very nature, are a very small light source. If they have a rectangular head, that light source is going to tend to be very focused and more hard. A round one is not a solution to make it a soft light source. It's still relatively small. But when you either modify it or even just by itself, it is slightly softer because it's slightly bigger and it's a more natural shape. If you look at a round one put into a softbox versus a square one put into a softbox, you'll see it on the diffusion. One fills up the whole box. One is very square in the middle. Westcott, at the end of the day, is a modifier company that makes light modifiers and also now makes strobes. And I think we're doing really well with it. But at the end of the day, every one of our lights is designed to make the best quality of light that it can. So the FJ 400 is a big bulb out front to fill up a softbox. The FJ 200 is a bare bulb design up front to fill up a softbox. Really, we're interested in giving you a better quality of light, which also has worked out for us because it's made it easier for us to make consistent light. Tim, thank you. I appreciate that, what you're saying. Not that one of them didn't work right, but that we were able to hook you up. You probably talked to my boy out in Arizona. He is a good man. But whoever you spoke to, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to, I'll name them. Our main competition at this point is Goddix, and good luck getting help if you break it or if you need tech support. That's what separates us. Do I think our lights are better? I do. But, they're minimally better because at this price point, you're going to do what you're going to do. We have faster flash, better accuracy, universal, we have a lot of things that all add up to make it better. But even if they were exactly the same, I would say that our support makes it worth investing in us. What is the flash duration of the flash? So, Miles, it's a great question, and it depends on the power. I don't know if Miles is still here.
He asked that when you were showing the pictures of Zoe with the tennis racket.
Do you have a range even?
Yeah, well, it goes at 1, it's 19,000th of a second. At 4, it's around 8,000th of a second, or maybe 12. They're out in the car. I'm going to shoot right after this. Somebody's bought one of those new electric Mustangs and asked me to shoot them with the city in the background, so off I go. It's 19,000th of a second on an FJ 400 is the fastest. On a 200, it's a little faster, but there's less power, so there's a trade-off there. It's a good question. There is a chart somewhere on the site.
Okay, I'll look it up. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Francesca. I appreciate that. Daniel, thank you. Wow, thank you. big capital letters for great. I'm not being facetious. If it sounds like it, it's just because I'm from New York. John, thank you. Catherine, shooting group of 6 adults outside. Would love to use your ideas to light the people over the background. Would umbrellas work on both sides, or is it too diffuse? So it depends on which lights you're using, Catherine. It's a great question, and there's unfortunately so many things that become like I put all the EXIF data in because people ask for it, because they seem to think that that's going to mean that they're going to dial in those settings and it's going to make them have the same picture. The challenge is that without knowing what the ambient light looked like, it doesn't make a difference. So if you're using two 400s and it's 2 400-watt lights and it's 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. or it's 3 p.m. till sundown, you'll be fine with those 2 lights and a couple of umbrellas. You'll do okay. If you're trying to shoot this at noon, you're going to really have a hard time overcoming that light, and you're going to still get shadows from the sun.
Yeah, I was gonna put them in open shade near where sun is, but in the shade, and have the background. I haven't seen the location yet, but what I would go for is a background that's in shade, and shoot between 3 and 6 in the afternoon. So
you'll be
softer
fine.
light.
That'll give you a nice quality of light. Just remember that if you can't put them all in the same plane, which 6 is that number where a lot of times you end up with like 3 and 3 or 2 and 4 or something like that.
Yeah.
That the farther back you put the light, the more even the exposure will be between the people in the front and the people in the back.
Okay. Yeah, that was a good tip. Thank you.
Yep. Dick, thank you. If you want, I'm going to Jersey City roughly. If you can make the trip in the next hour and a half, you can help. I'm pretty stoked to actually see the car. I mean, even though I don't know why they're calling an SUV a Mustang, but it still looks pretty cool. Very informative. Garen, no, they're not LEDs. They all have a modeling light, every one of them, including the speed light. But no, they're not LEDs. At this point in time, LEDs, for the most part, still can't beat the sun. There's some light companies out there advertising constant lights to use also as strobes. If you see their videos, just look how close the lights are and how dark the environments they're shooting in are. It is probably the future, but I don't know when. LEDs are still not terribly putting out a lot of power is not their strong suit. They are awesome at being really effective at putting out not much power without costing a lot of power. But if you ask them to go boom, 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 they do have some problems. So, but it is the future. But it's a good question. But yeah, every one of our lights has a modeling light, which is LED. And it depends on which one, how bright it is. The 400 is a 20 watt, the 200 is a 5 watt, the 80 is a 2 watt. They're mostly enough not to use as a constant light source, although I've used the 400 as a constant in emergencies if I was shooting like a video interview. But it's not the main object of it. They are more than good enough to help you do focus assist or tell you where the light's going to be in the picture. It's a great question. Anybody else? Guys, I really appreciate it.
I'm sorry. I have a 2-part question.
Who's talking?
Shelley.
Shelley.
Okay. I can't see you. I mean, go ahead, Shelley. Let's have it.
Sorry. The question is,
Shelley.
you have a one-stop diffusion panel, right?
Yeah, roughly. It's a little less than that. It's probably 2/3 of the stuff, but yes.
Okay. And is it like the trifold or something like that, or is it more of a rectangle?
All right, so we're talking about 2 different things. So when you said diffusion, I thought you were just talking about what's in the front of my soft boxes. Right.
No, I
So
mean standalone.
Reflectors are reflectors that have the shoot through part,
Mm-hmm.
or scrim gym also is measured in how many stops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
let's talk about the scrim gym then. Mm-hmm.
So we have different ones. So scrim gyms, photographers use them mostly to cut light, but I don't see as many guys use them as I'd love to see use them because obviously we sell them. But they're awesome if you need to make open shade when you don't have it. You know,
Yeah.
they're very they're kind of like Legos or erector sets where you can plug in the pieces and depending on which size of diffusion you get. We make them in 4x4, 4x8, and then bigger and bigger. The challenge
Like a sunbounce.
yes, Sunbounce is out of business, unfortunately. Or well,
Oh, I didn't know that.
fortunately. Yeah.
Okay.
The Scrim Gym's been around forever. But
Okay.
yes, it's like that. Then you've got our reflectors. Our reflectors come in all different sizes, and the 5-in-1s and all of those. Yes, they have a shoot through, which I'll use sometimes as I'll set a light up on the other side of it, just if that's all I've got, because sometimes I've got folded up in the trunk of the car.
Right.
There are different stops, and so you have to take that into account when you're shooting through. The ones, if it's one stop, it's basically the same as shooting through a softbox, and so it doesn't really affect anything unless you. I don't use a light meter, not because I'm smart, but because I, at this point in my life, trust the LCD on the back of the camera to be pretty accurate. So I'm going to take a picture and go from there. And if I think I'm too dark, I'm going to turn up the power. If I think I'm too bright, I'm going to turn down the power. So how many stops are coming through my Scrim Gym or my reflector only really matters to me for controlling ambient light. If I'm at noon, I know I might need the 2-stop Scrim Gym, because I really got to cut a ton of light. Whereas if I'm shooting in a part of the country that's less harsh, I can get away with a half stop. We make various different ones.
Okay, so my second part of the question is, if I'm shooting through a sheet of your diffusion, be it the Scrim Gym or the
a reflector, yeah,
the reflector, right? And I'm using a speed gun.
Yep.
I maybe have a Nikon 900 or 850. I forget which one.
900, 910, 5000.
Right. Yeah. And so say I'm shooting through directly at a subject. Say I'm coming in through the side on their like camera left, camera right, but side lighting, and I'm using a say about a 1-stop like a Scrim Gym. How is the quality going to be different than if I put that speed gun in one of the Apollos or one of the
it's not. I mean, it would only be different quality of light if you had a much bigger diffusion. So if you use a big Scrim Gym, art based on the speed light, because the speed light to begin with, an SB 5000, a Canon 600, is only going to be about 65 watts to start.
Okay.
So if I use a big piece of diffusion to get really nice soft light, which would give us soft light, I still have to take that speed light and move it far back in order for the light to spread enough to hit enough of the diffusion to hit me. So it's really diminishing returns. Whereas if I use that in an Apollo, the Apollo, you could shoot it either way. But if you want the most diffuse, softest light, you shoot it backwards into the Apollo and then it comes back out.
Right.
Or you can shoot straight through. If you shoot straight through and you go into the zoom function on your speed light and put it to the widest setting so that it goes through as much of the softbox as possible, it'll be diffuse. But if I'm using an Apollo 90% of the time, I'm shooting backwards. And then I'm putting the light as close as I can to get soft light.
Softer.
It's a 43-inch, the orb especially is a 43-inch light. That's a lot of surface area. It's a soft light unless you move it far back. And if you move it far back with a speed light, again, you've lost so much power that it doesn't make sense.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
So JC, how fast can you get to Jersey City?
I'm gonna be there in about an hour.
Okay.
I'm all packed. The camera's ready. I'm hoping I didn't pick the spot. I'm hoping that there's enough space where I can get off a shot with the 600 millimeter to compressor to the city. if not, the city's going to look like it's going to be big car, little city. So fine. The Empire State Building is apparently red, white, and blue tonight. They apparently got it all lit up. So, and she's got a red Mustang. I'm hoping the pictures come out really good. If they come really good, you'll see them tomorrow. And if they aren't good, then you'll never see them.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
You
So
got
I
water
just want
jugs in
to.
the car.
What was that?
Have you got the requisite water jugs?
It's funny is like, anytime I shoot cars, usually I put a polarizer on. I haven't done a lot at night, but what you said is funny is that I did say that. I said, listen, what does the parking area look like? Because I would have thrown down some water to get some reflections. And apparently it's not the nicest, we'll see. But yeah, I might bring some water.
Oh, okay.
Good call.
Yep. Well, again, I think Pittsburgh really, really wants to say thank you, and everybody else who joined in.
I really thank you guys. And like I said, if you guys need anything, hit me up. I'll definitely work out a way to get you some sort of a discount.
Great.
We don't have an official ASMP discount, but I'll make it work. I'll make sure.
Thanks.
Whether it's the tax or whatever, I'll get somebody to give you a deal.
Send tchotchkes.
Just say Pittsburgh sent them.
And if anyone wants to mess around with them, the FJ 400s, I have a couple.
Justin does have a couple.
Yes.
Awesome, guys. I really
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
nice to
Thank you.
see you.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Peace.
All right.
Yeah.
Good luck
Thank
tonight.
you.
Thanks, bud.
Yeah. Have
Enjoy
fun
your time in
tonight.
Jersey City.
Mhm.
I think I'm actually going to Weehawken, which is even better than Jersey City.
Oh, gee. Yeah.
Yeehaw.